Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human SOS live show. Glad to have you with us today. Reminder to let us know where you're joining from and be sure to type in any questions, comments for Anton and I as we go forward. Look forward to a good time of engagement and moving forward. So, Anton, you want to introduce the topic for today?
Yeah, just welcome everybody. Hopefully you're all having a great week. Oh, hold on. I got to turn this off somehow. I don't want those subtitles. Give me one sec. From beginning. How do,
Technology is a great thing.
and now I want the screen's too big. It won't let me turn off. Okay, I'll just present from here. It's fine. Can you still see everything fine?
Yep.
Okay. Today we're going to talk about assessing your team stress and really just your own stress as well. It's basically based on our needs assessment. With Prospective Force, we believe that stress is a big picture thing. There's a lot of different sources of stress. So we want to make sure that when we're helping companies and teaching you how to help yourself, that we're not giving you too much information, too many focus points, right? 10% is what we focus on, right? Very small, gradual changes done with consistency that lead to massive, outcomes and great transformations. So what we do is we create a needs assessment and we see 12 different principles within three major pillars of life, health, and work. And we basically see, where do you score the worst? Where is really the root cause of your stress? Where are the biggest problems? And then we're able to transition and fix that as we apply the principles that we have in there. So first we'll get into is going to be our agenda. So agenda for today is going to be, as always, we start out with HR news of the week, and management of stress at a workplace is the focus for this article. Then we'll talk about how we're not two different people at work and at home, and why we have to be, helped in a holistic way. We'll talk about the 4 principles of health stress management. We'll talk about 4 principles of life stress management, and then we'll finish with 4 principles of work stress management. Any shout outs before we get started, Kev?
I'm not seeing anyone that has identified themselves yet, so we'll move forward.
I'm just seeing if I'm live on my end. I don't know if I am. It says I'm live, but I'm not seeing my own icon popping up, but it doesn't mean that I'm not. Sometimes LinkedIn does that. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I'm not live. Oh, no, maybe I am. I don't know. Yep, there it is.
We're
There it
on
is. No, we're good.
Facebook
We're
and
good. No, we're good.
YouTube.
Yeah, I see it. All right, so let's get into this article. This is a little bit not your typical article. This is a more of a nerdy publication article. It's a research article, but you can look up the whole article. I'll give you the information there. But it kind of gives you this diagram on the right, and it talks about model of work stress. And it breaks down into culture, demands, role, control, change, relationships, all feed into employees, and employees take this on. And then what happens is then you have individual symptoms that come from this, you have organizational systems come from this, and then ultimately it leads to negative outcomes for both. So let's take a look at what they're talking about for really the symptoms of stress. So we're going to get into this in more detail on this slide. I apologize, it's a little small. I just wanted to get it on here, but I'll just talk about each point. So the first root cause of it was job content. Where you have tedious, understimulating tasks, lack of variety, and just unpleasant tasks. Kev, have you ever experienced that in any of your jobs where this created stress for you?
Oh, yeah. Feeling like I'm doing busy work is the way we used to define it. And it's frustrating, especially the more you're developed as a leader and have working off of goals and mission. Yeah, it's very frustrating, very stressful because you feel like you're just wasting time.
And especially, what's interesting? I think the people that this frustrates the most or stresses the most are your high performers. The people
Yeah,
that can do a lot, move mountains for you, but they're stuck doing tedious tasks that are not maximizing their potential. And that's going to hurt your team significantly. The second one is workload and workplace in general, like how much workload there is. So having too much or too little to do, working under time pressures. And the one that I see this happen from the most with leaders has to do with it has to do with leaders adding things to people's plates, but not taking anything off. Leaders are not cognizant of how much stuff people are currently doing. So they ask for a new, assignment, new project, new activity, whatever, without taking something off. And that's a very common thing. And I don't think leaders mean to do that. They're just unaware, not paying attention. They need to do better with that. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and part of that is that we, as leaders, don't give endpoints for what we're doing, or a way to define, hey, we're done with this part of it, at least for now, and being able to know what's going on. If we have just a bunch of open-ended things going on and the leader doesn't keep up with them, then yeah, that's going to make it tough. Welcome, Satish. Glad to have you again. Satish has been with us before, so thanks for joining us from India.
Yeah, so moving on, the next symptom that we're going to see, I just realized, I apologize on my end. I was showing you guys a blank screen. I just fixed that. But working hours, this is one that I feel really passionate about. And I think this one leader controls significantly. And leaders oftentimes unintentionally negatively influence working hours within the workplace by working too many hours themselves. And I've done this. I took over a team one time, and the previous manager would work, sun up to sundown. Like, he wouldn't see the daylight a lot of times because he was there so long. Come in at like 6 o'clock in the morning, leave it like 7 o'clock at night, 12, 13 hours. Great person, great effort, really doing a lot. But the problem is they showed the team that that's what was requiring, and they made them feel uncomfortable in a way of leaving early themselves. So they were working longer hours without wanting to because they felt that unsaid pressure. I'm sure you've seen that stuff happen.
Oh yeah, power of example. And what we really have to make sure of as leaders is we understand the power of example, both positive and negative, and not modeling good work behaviors in terms of time. Like you, I appreciate that we're want to be diligent and want to work hard, but there also has to be recovery time in there as well. And if not, especially depending on the person, stressors are going to be out the roof.
Yep, for sure. Folks, I'm just noticing there's no way for me to show you my face and Kevin's face and my screen at the same time. So I apologize. You guys get to just watch the screen. We're doing something different technologically, and I'm limited by screen sharing and what I can do on my end.
Well, some of them can count their blessings on that end time.
Not such a bad thing, I know. All right, but then getting into the next one, and that's participation and control, like lack of participation and decision making. And I've finishing up my MBA right now, and this is one of the biggest things that I see as a focus point, teaching these young leaders or future leaders how to include other people's in the decision making process, but also how to be able to do that in a way that doesn't create bad decisions or create too much chaos and things like that. Because sometimes trying to get too many people providing feedback, it gets crazy and it actually creates stress in itself. So cut it off there, but lack of ability to control your future, lack of ability of feeling like you have control over your advancements and things like that. Those are big things for stress.
The more we get buy-in from people, the more productive, more satisfied, and less conflict.
Absolutely. And the thing is, for leaders, leaders that are watching this, it doesn't mean they're going to make the decision. The decision falls on your shoulders. They just need to feel included in that decision, and they were able to provide feedback. And sometimes it may not go with the way they chose to. I mean, they as the employees that contributed to this, but the fact that you at least heard them and then provided the why behind why you chose to go otherwise is much better than just simply just making that decision and not including them. So then getting into career development, status, and pay. So, some things here: job insecurity, lack of promotion prospects, under promotion or over promotion, unclear or unfair performance evaluation systems, being overskilled or underskilled for the job. All those things lead to stress on your team members' shoulders, right? And then just kind of breeze through a few more of these. Role in the organization, unclear role. That's a big one, where job descriptions don't match, right? We don't really have, I forget I think I've heard you call it something like a task description or something like that, where it's better than a job description.
Right. Break it down to the task involved and what needs to be done rather than some generic description of the role,
Yep.
because if we're using one size fits all description for everybody we put in that role, we are uh, less effective and cause them to be less uh, at perform less and not at their peak.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and then you got your interpersonal relationships, right? And that's where a lot of the culture comes in. And that's inadequate, inconsiderate, unsupportive supervision, where you don't have, the relationship with your subordinates, or vice versa, poor relationship with coworkers, harassment and violence, isolated or solitary work, no agreed procedures for dealing with problems. That's a big one. I see that all the time where companies inconsistently handle problems. They don't have procedures for this. And the last one is just organizational culture with poor communication, poor leadership, lack of clarity, and homework interface issues with conflicting demands of work and home. And ultimately, those are all the different symptoms, guys, or I should say the different root causes of where stress is coming from. Then effects of work stress on individuals, you're going to have your physical effects, emotional effects, intellectual and behavioral effects. And what that's going to do is it's going to create sleep disturbances, headaches, gastrointestinal upset. And guys, we're doing this really high level today, so I could go into deep detail between why this is going on for each one. We will do more of these shows in the future. We do this every week, but today we just want to give you the big picture, right? Raised blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, and in some cases, it's actually going to be a lower blood pressure. Emotional, issues with anxiety, irritability, depression. You're going to have intellectual ones, which for business is kind of a big deal, right? Loss of concentration, lack of motivation, difficulty with thought process. You're going to have loss of memory and poor decision making. That's going to kill your business in itself, just that C level alone. And then behavioral, right? Substance abuse. You're going to have decreased libido, inappropriate display of behavior, segregation, unpunctuality. But then I would expand this further, obviously, because I've studied this, and risk aversion, right? Fear of failure really goes up. What's the word that I'm looking for? Imposter syndrome starts to go up. All these things get really bad. And then organizationally, I'm going to go back to this slide where the negative outcomes are going to be increased overheads. You're going to have, recruiting and training costs are going to skyrocket because of these things. Reduced profits, increased accidents, increased litigations, right? Your increased healthcare costs. All these things are going to be direct causes of stress. This statistic is outdated, but it's told that we are experiencing stress at 100 times more than our grandparents. And because of that, it's causing business over $300 billion annually in US alone. The issue is that the root causes and these outcomes are not being connected to stress. And the other problem is the way that people are managing stress right now, which you see on the slide here, I'm going to talk about next, is not effective. And I don't want to sound bad here, but I'm going to. I'm happy that people are helping with stress. I am. I'm happy that the world has become more focused on this. I'm happy the corporate world become more focused on this. Unfortunately, the current traditional approaches to stress management of meditation and just mindfulness are not enough. They're incomplete. They were fine 10 years ago. Our world has shifted. Our stress is no longer just a little bit of work stress that we have to kumbaya and breathe and let go. There's way more complexity to this, and systems and processes have to be shifted, but also home life plays so much of a factor on our stress now that I would argue that professional stress is not the greatest stress anymore, especially after the last couple of years that we've been in. So we're not two different people, guys. That's one thing that we have to remember and really understand, that we're not one person at home and one person in our everyday life. So why am I saying that? Because when people are normally addressing it, they're addressing work stress. That's usually the case. Or they may be addressing life stress. But nobody's coming in and looking at the big picture and saying, how are all of these stressors, health, life, and work connect? How are they impacting our body? And how do we approach this course correction in a way that makes sense for the person and it's not overwhelming? Something that considers behavior change. Part of it's a science, right? We can't just throw a ton of stuff at you. You're not going to change. So this is what we do. We take a look at work. We take a look at life. We realize there's no balance. They're never going to be balanced. It's coexistence. It's congruence. And in the middle is your health. And when you can make those three things unite and work together, you can unlock your potential.
Yeah, and I think I can have a misunderstanding of what balance is. The old model of balance for a lot of people is finding middle ground on everything, and it's not an effective approach. It causes us to end up stressed on both sides of or all parts of our life, because we, rather than having the ability to focus and move in one direction or another, based on current circumstances, based on us as an individual, we end up stressed because we're not finding that perfect middle. And what I keep reminding people is that balance is about having a good handle on two opposing characteristics or qualities, and being able to manage them, and know when to gravitate towards one or the other. It's not this middle of the ground. In fact, joking saying that I've heard is, he who walks down the middle of the road gets hit by traffic going both directions. And that is a picture of the levels of stress caused by trying to stay in the middle all the time.
Yeah, and balance, when we look at balance as like an even thing, we don't consider external environment. I talk about this all the time. It's you think that you're living in a vacuum, everything around you is flat, so then you being flat on this pendulum or whatever, the teeter-totter is the right thing. No, the world is not flat. Everything has external factors in it. So if you're on a hill, standing on a hill, then that teeter-totter is going to be offset to one side in order to truly be balanced. And we have to adjust, and leaders have to adjust to this. Leaders really have to grasp this concept and understand it. So the next thing we're going to talk about, and I'm not going to pop this up because it's just a simple presentation, but it's just the four pillars of health, right? We have four principles. We have three major pillars. We focus on health, which is basically, it's how you are, your state of being, how your internal system operates. Your mind is going to be the first thing, right? How does this thing work? Stress is really damaging to our mind. So that's the first component. The second component is going to be your internal health, which is your physiology, thinking about your blood work, your gastrointestinal, functions, your any sort of internal physiology function. That's the second component. The third component is going to be nourishment. And I'm using a very specific word here. I didn't say the word diet, because it has a negative connotation to it, and it's not what we believe at Prospective Force. It's not what 10% Fitter, which is our health brand, is based on. I encourage you to stop referring to your nourishment as a diet. Diet represents deprivation. Diet represents something that we have to do short term. Diet represents avoiding things. Nourishment represents fueling your system. Nourishment signals getting your body the things that it needs to be at its optimal. Nourishment is chasing a good versus running from a bad. And I'm telling you guys, if you want to change your behavior, I don't know any behavior change specialist that would argue this point. It is always better to run to a positive than it is to run from a negative. So for that reason, yep, go ahead, Kev.
Comment from Satish that, there we go. Developing a positive attitude and accepting yourself as you are, not expecting too much, but being practical are some of the suggestions that come to mind. So moving towards the positive instead of running from the negative is indeed a powerful tool. If you take nothing else today, take that one.
Thank you so much, Navira. Navira gave a comment. This is such a great point, nourishment. And the same principles applies to movement. That's another thing that I'm not saying. I don't use the word exercise, and I've worked with a team to also get away from that. Exercise is very constrictive. It puts people into this box where they have to do things a certain way. But movement accomplishes the same things as exercise, but it can be done with more passion and not feeling so rigid. And different people respond differently. Some people look at this rigid environment. They want 5 days a week workouts. They need exactly what to do, and they're going to follow that. And that works for them. But also, many people don't respond to that. They are more, Kev, maybe that's you. I know V, one of our partners, Virginia, she does a lot of salsa. She does salsa dancing. And I'm like, that's brilliant. It does the same thing that exercise does. You get more enjoyment, you get more positive chemicals out of it, and you're more likely to stay consistent. That's the point, right? So some people are like, Anton, what's the most perfect exercise I can do? My answer is, after 12 years of health coaching, the one that you'll stick with the most. That's the reality behind it all. And then you have these gurus that are coming out and saying, here's this best exercise out there. But it just makes a person feel pain. It makes them suffer. And some people don't respond well to that. So for that reason, we call that movement. So just any high level thoughts on our health pillar, Kev? I know I kind of ran through high level across them.
I love the reframing of the terms, because unfortunately, a lot of terms do have negative connotation. Diet is that something you're going to do that you can't stand to do, but you're going to do it for a time. And then the problem is when most of us get off of that period of time, we end up in a worse place than we started, generally speaking, because we don't have a lifestyle change. And then the whole area of movement. I love it. I had rather go out and do projects around the house, work in the yard, go help somebody else do manual work to get exercise than go to a gym. Nothing wrong with gyms. Gyms are fine, and I've been to gyms, and on occasion I might like to do it, whatever. But if you want my mind to be in it as well as my body, give me some physical work to do, and I'll get all kinds of exercise and do it with, because I think for me, I see more purpose in it, and that's me. That doesn't mean that people that go to the gym don't see purpose in it, but we're wired differently. So yeah, movement of some kind. And the one thing I would mention though is, as we do movement, make sure you are doing movement with consideration for the physical effect. And Anton's helped me get that perspective in making sure that we those movements are effective and positive rather than damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, there's levels to everything. That's one thing that I also want people to understand. You don't walk into a gym and pick up 300 pounds and start throwing it overhead. That makes sense to us. But sometimes when we do things, when we program, when we create these plans, when we set up our nutritional, we go from 0 to 100 and think that's sustainable. Right? You're going from a standard American diet where you're eating regular fast food and those kind of things. And now all of a sudden you're going to have this perfect meal plan. You're going to have meal prep and you're going to have all this stuff. And it lasts for 2 weeks and people fall off and they're wondering, they're beating themselves up. I'm like, no, you failed from the start because you try to change too much from yourself. Guys, I remind this point all the time. And this is where the concept of 10% comes from. We have 3 brands, right? 10% fitter is our health brand. 10% better is our life brand, and 10% impact is our work/leadership brand, right? And there's a reason for that 10%. We're combating the microwave society that we live in, this instant gratification, this, give me the perfect system, the perfect tool, let me throw it in a microwave for 2 minutes and it's ready to go. Life and behavior doesn't change that way. Science has said that for a long time. We're just not listening. We're not looking at the research. We're doing what seems logical, or at least, intuitively seems so, or what's popular on social media. So be careful with that. So for that reason, take on gradual change. If you change one thing about yourself, only once, statistically speaking, it's around 80 to 85% success rate. When you add a second thing into that mix and you're trying to change 2 things at once, you cut it by more than half and go down to 35% success rate. When you change 3 things or more, sorry, Kev, last one, you're going down to below 10 to 5%, somewhere around there. Think about when you do transformations for your health, for your stress management, whatever it may be, for leadership. Doesn't matter the principle you're trying to transform. How many things are you trying to tackle at once? How many focus points are there? So if you're failing, that's probably the reason for it.
Well, and that's why one of the things that we always caution, if you need assistance, great, reach out. We're happy to help you. But one thing that we tell you is, don't come to us looking for a plug and play program that you can just put in and apply to everybody, because we know going in that is going to be limited in its effectiveness. And the negative side is going to alienate the people that it's not effective for. So you're actually compounding your problem rather than helping it. What I've observed is probably most plug and play systems, concepts will work about 30% effective. 30% of your people, it will be effective. On occasion, it might even get to half, but I doubt that happening very often, especially the more it's related to human behaviors versus other things.
And one of the ones that we kind of brushed over pretty quickly, and it's interesting because it's the one that's the least understood of the 4 that we mentioned. If you were to guess, Kev, because I know we never talked to you about this. Out of the 4, we got right the mind, internal health, nourishment, and movement. Which one do you think is the least understood by general population, and corporations?
Say them again.
In the mind, internal
Yeah.
health, nourishment, and movement.
I would say probably the least known of any of them, nourishment
And I
would be
put you
my
on this.
guess.
I put you on the spot there, and I would disagree, but I'm just curious what you were going to say. I would agree that I think people think they know the least about it, but
Right.
I would actually challenge to say most people know enough to be successful.
Okay.
Most people know I shouldn't be eating fast food. Most people know that processed foods are negative. Most people know that sugars are bad.
Right.
If you change those three things, you're good. Like honestly,
Right.
you're better than 50% of America, maybe even more,
Right.
just by doing that. But the reality is most people don't know enough about internal health to really understand how little they know. That's the
Yeah.
thing. You don't know what you don't know, right? They haven't even explored it enough.
Mhm.
But when it comes down to stress, for example, right, we connect blood sugar regulation to nourishment and internal health, but really it's an internal health issue. What people don't
Mhm.
understand is that your body can't regulate blood sugar well. It uses the same chemicals to regulate blood sugar as it does to regulate stress. So think about it. If you just put a bunch of crappy sugar in your body and you're already stressed, your body's already overproducing that chemical response. Cortisol is the hormone that we're talking about. Now, all of a sudden, it needs to dump more of that in the system just because of the sugar you put in there. But do you think like that? Do you actually consider that and go, under high amount of stress, I shouldn't be eating a lot of sugar? But what does your body want to do? It's the other thing around. Because what happens is, and I'm going to get a little nerdy on you guys, but what happens is when your body's under stress, it wants simple energy, whether that stress be a line in front of your face, a boss in your ear, or
Mhm.
problems at home. Doesn't matter what it is. Chemically, it's the same thing. The body thinks there's a line in front of my face. I got to respond. So it wants simple energy. A carbohydrate, sugar molecule, chain molecule, break one bond, make very fast energy. Fat's complex. Body's like, I don't have time to break down fat. So it breaks through the sugar that it has in its body because we're very limited how much we can store. And what does it want then? It wants more of it. So to replenish that blood sugar response. So now we want more of the thing that's causing us stress, but it also makes us feel comfortable. We're conditioned from youth to eat comfort foods, sugary foods to make us feel better under stress. Do you see the complexity of this dilemma and our relationship with food and how that connects to everything, our misunderstanding of maternal health? We are headed for a very dark place, and I hate to be doom and gloom right now, but that's the reality why Prospective Force is doing what we're doing. We're preparing for this epidemic that we're in that most people don't realize we're in. A lot of people are coming to me and going, Anton, you're silly for focusing your business 100% on stress. I'm like, why? They're like, because people won't buy it. Companies won't spend money on it. I'm like, if not this year, then next year, it's just, I see it coming. I see the end of this rope that we're hanging from, and it's not a good ending. And the problem is, we'll have the systems ready. I just want to get there before the problem becomes so bad it's a 1.5 year recovery for most people instead of a 3-month intervention.
Well, and I can appreciate your comment about internal health too, because as a result of our not having a good grasp of internal health for ourselves, I mean, we rely on other people for that purpose, and it's on some level we have to because we have medical experts and the like. But the problem is that without our own understanding, we end up focusing on symptoms with strictly medications and the like, and never get to the root causes. And when we add in medications and the like, we have then added a new component into potentially affecting our internal health stress points. And people really don't understand. And if you, one insight into this is any medication you're on, look at the two things on there: side effects and drug interactions, and ask yourself, if you're taking these and these are potential side effects, what is the implication for your total internal health in that regard? And I having been medically trained, I'm more aware of it, but I know that I'm still learning about internal health and how the different systems interact. Anton has done a lot to help me begin to connect more of that together and connect it to how it affects us, not just internally physically, but outwardly physically, as well as mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. And the more we can uh, grasp that and get to the root. See, that's one of the things that we specialize in doing is we won't come in and identify symptoms and try to treat symptoms, because we know that is ineffective. Well, our goal is, before we identify a plan or start a process, is to understand what are the real roots going on. And then we can start talking about how do we address those roots.
And the thing is, it's not just about, like, root cause sounds good. And everybody kind of talks about this all the time. The reality is, when it comes down to stress management, you have no alternative. If you truly want to fix your stress, you have no alternative, because it's just too complex and we've got too much going on. What I mean by this, right? I always think about, whenever I say root cause, I picture the tree. And the reality is, most stress management is focused on each individual leaf. They're chasing these symptoms. There's so many leaves out there that you try to solve one, the other 5 pop up with alternative issues, right? So the better approach is going to be getting into the actual stump and the branches and stuff like that. And I break this down kind of in three ways of looking at medicine. Your leaves are your symptom-based medicine, which is Western medicine. You have headache, here's a pill for your headache. You have stomach ache, here's a pill for your stomach ache. Every symptom has a medication associated with it. What they're not doing is looking, like I said, how they're correlating. It's just trying to get you better. But don't get me wrong, that's needed. Some people are suffering and they need that. The next level is holistic medicine, which is going to be, you still have a problem. Now it's been a diagnosis, but instead of just looking at each leaf, they're looking at the tree branch and saying, how are these connecting? What is the centralized thing? Maybe it's going to be your blood sugar regulation, gut health, your leaky gut, whatever it may be, right? But the issue is, now this is all above ground. And anytime problems surface above ground, they're going to take significantly more resources and time to correct. When we talk about root cause and what we do, we identify these things in the holistic realm, but before they become big things, right? So somebody's got Crohn's disease, that would be up above ground. But if we're noticing they have digestion issues, gassiness, bloatiness, and some of these early symptoms, we get to it and fix it before it gets over there. But I like your point on medications, Kev, because I want to drive this one home for the listeners. It was maybe 10 years ago now. Went to a seminar, and it was a naturopath presenting. Dr. Laval is super, super well known in my circles. And he basically took some of the biggest medications we have, and next to him, he put symptoms of side effects of those medications. But what he also did is, next to that, he put the nutrients that medication strips out of your body. Magnesium is one, very common. CoQ10 is another, very, very common. And what it's funny, when you look at the side effects of the nutrient deficiency and you compare them to the side effects of the medication, align.
Oh, okay.
Doctors don't talk like that. They don't look at that, unfortunately, because they're just not, education is not provided for them. Our medical system is lacking because it's just too much reactive response stuff. I love naturopaths a little bit more, but to me, DOs, no offense to any MDs or anybody else, but to me, DOs are the best because they look at the bigger picture. But they're still medical doctors. They're not necessarily naturopaths. But yeah, so let's talk about the next one, the next pillar. So we talked about health. Health is important, and that's kind of understood, right? This is how you fortify, right? We talk about fortification and resilience and stress. Remember, I said your health is how you are. If you're going to fortify something, you got to fortify how you are, not what you are or what you do or those kind of things. It comes from inside. If you're resilient with your health because your stress management is on point, your chemical processes are where it should, the things that happen outside, you can take on so much more. It just rolls off your shoulders. So the second component is life, right? Work-life balance. But unfortunately, how much support are we giving people at work for their life problems? And we're going, well, that's not my space as a leader. That's not what I should be doing. Okay, great. But do you think that they're not bringing those problems with them to work? You're naive if you think that's the case. You can't separate that. Nobody's a robot that's going to go, okay, I punched my clock. Now I'm leaving all my life stuff behind and now I'm moving on into my other stuff. So for that reason, we have to realize as leaders, there's a huge gap, especially in the younger generations. The family unit is not what it used to be. There's so much more responsibility on the leader's shoulders today than it was before, because younger generation, and I even think my generation started it, is not taught some of the basic life principles that your generation was taught at the dinner table. It's not the same. And it falls on more leaders' shoulders to do that.
Well, and interesting your comment that uh, that we can't expect people to turn off home when they get to work. And I will tell you, my generation, we were the best at trying to do it. Now, interesting, my generation, what ends up happening is that that mindset contributed to breakdown in the family. It contributed to earlier death, rise in heart related issues, which are tied into stress, and so on. And so we've tried it. Okay. We've been trying it for a long time. And depending on the person, will determine the relative effectiveness. But at the end of the day, even those that it was most effective with was still not healthy. It was still not good because for example, for a long time I could not understand why uh, the situation was as it was with heart issues. You expect someone poor, overweight, no movement, poor health, you expect them to experience heart trouble and blood trouble. But you look at somebody, you see these folks that are in tip top physical condition, and they're falling over with massive heart attacks, strokes, and you're going, wait a minute, that doesn't fit with what we're being told. Eat right, exercise, and everything will be wonderful. And what they missed in this was the other two components, the life component and then the area of leadership as part of the whole picture. That's why when we approach anyone, we will not approach it just on one plane, because that is set up for failure. And so uh, that's what drives why we do what we do, is that we want to be able to help someone look at things holistically. Now, it may be initially after assessing that the approach is based in one area because that's your biggest area, and that's fine. But until we get a holistic picture, you can't even make a good value judgment in that regard as to how to approach dealing with your stresses.
Yeah, one of my biggest pet peeves in coaching world is, and more probably health coaching, to see this, but I think it exists everywhere. And we talk about this, right? The one size fits all solution. People
Oh
come
yeah.
in and like, here's my problem. Oh, I got a solution for you. Go do this. I'm like, whoa, hold
Yeah.
on. What have you assessed? What have you taken a look at? You just found out that they have a problem, and now all of a sudden, which a problem is a leaf on a tree, like we just talked about. It's just a symptom. You haven't assessed anything to figure out, where is this thing actually coming from? What is the root cause of it? How deep can I go into this root cause to really get to the bottom of it, to help everything above with one single action, right? So definitely, what you want to focus on in life is going to be the four principles that we tell you. Now, guys, this is not all inclusive. Somebody else may tell you different principles. This is just what our research, our experience, has allowed us to come up with. And the first one is going to be your identity. That comment that you actually posted on the last one, that was really relevant for what I thought about identity. It was like, when we are not set at who we are, whether it be your values, your mission, your vision, your beliefs, your confidence, your, name whatever that goes into it. There's so much stress that's constantly created because of inefficiencies. That's one of the biggest things that we don't think about. How much stuff you do every day, every week, every year, every decade that doesn't serve you because you're chasing somebody else's dream. You're chasing things that you're not sure about. One day you go left, one day you go right. In reality, you stayed the same because there's no plan. There's no really coming from this deep rooted self-identity that you realize, this is who I am. I accept myself for who I am. And now I can move on and use that, whether it be building on my strengths or, circumventing my weaknesses. What are your thoughts on identity?
That's a big one. That's why this month I'm going to be rolling out a 7-week course on finding, understanding, and seeking your potential. We have way too many people that are trying to be someone else, or just are floundering around because they don't have any direction. One of them closest directions culturally that we give people is you can do anything you want to. Just set your mind to it. And I owe that just every time I see it, I just cringe inside because it's not true. We are not able to do anything and everything that we want to just because we put our mind to it. I will never be a natural athlete.
You're not going to dunk a basketball, Kev? Come
Now,
on, man.
my body just will not do that vertical 4-foot leap so that I can stuff the basketball in the goal. I've tried. I've worked at it, and all I've done is look silly. And and recognizing that about ourselves helps us then to put our energy in who we are designed to be. We have a design, we have a purpose, and usually our passions will line up with it if we find them and understand them and put them in the context of all of it. So yeah, our identity is so key. So many of us are working off of other people's identity, trying to model them, and that's why imposter syndrome is on the rise, because we're trying to be imposters. I don't mean to be blunt, but we really are. We're not trying to be ourselves. We're trying to be someone else and what they did that worked for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the funny part, you know who does this to us the most? Our parents. Our parents try to set our identities based on kind of what they want. And I understand influence, and it's your job as a parent to do that. But at some point, just like a good leader, you got to let them go. You got to let them fail, do their thing, whatever it is, doing, figuring themselves out, be the support system along the way. But, my mom always wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor. God forbid I was one of those things. I would hate my life. Just not the kind of job that would serve who I am and my identity. But yeah, that's the first one. The second one is going to be your relationships, just overall life relationships, the kind of things like family relationships, your acquaintances, your friends, all those kind of things. So much stress comes from not managing those relationships properly.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you are a yes person and you're not able to set boundaries, and people are, whether it consciously or subconsciously taking advantage of you because they're giving you things and asking you for help all the time, and you're just bogging yourself down with those tasks, or it's the kind of things that, maybe it's just family stuff where you're not doing a good job of maintaining your family relationships. And that's putting constant strain on other family members, which is putting strain on you, right? There's many layers to this, but relationships are a big cause of stress. And if you're going to have stress management, relationships can be either a detractor or a promoter for stress management, right? You either can have the support systems that you need to help you get through stuff because you manage your relationships well, or you're going to have that shoulder, the weight on your shoulders all the time that you're logging around because you're not managing them well.
Well, and one thing I'll tell you about relationships, the majority of them, even though the symptom is that to have a good relationship with some people, I need to make more money so I can give them things. Most people, that is not the basis for their area of best way to relate. You start looking into the love languages and the different ways we communicate and things like that. At best, those that want things is 20% of the population. So if that's your default answer, you're missing, again, on average, you're missing 80% of the people, including your significant other and your direct family members. So don't look at that as the default answer. They may be more happy with less things and more of you.
I
And
think out of 5 left, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, quite often that is true. They, especially with your children, they don't need more things, even though at times they are children and they think they do, but what in reality they need us as their parents.
No, you're right. And it's funny you say 20%. You're saying 20% because it's 1/5 of the 5 love languages.
Phenomenal.
But the reality is it's probably smaller than that. And I would argue that it's the least effective, right? Because out of the 5 love languages, it is the most extrinsically based love communication, right? So, and some people are that way. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but I'm just saying it's not sustainable. Like,
Right.
just you mentioned kids. Think about it. How much your kids, you buy them a present, right? And they're excited. And it take a bigger and bigger present to get the same level of excitement? And at some point, the present that you bought 2 years ago, that same level of present you give it to them, and they're kind of smirking and they don't even feel grateful for it, even though you still try to show the same level of love, because it's an extrinsic reward. It loses its luster over time. So the second, or that was the second one, is relationship. The third one is going to be life design. And it's very connected to identity, because once we can have our identity set, then we can create the life design that we want. And what this has to do with, and I'll give you guys a story. Thankfully, I found the concept of life design about 5 years ago, and I started working on mine. And the reason this was good for me is because 2 years after that, I was fired from a role. I wasn't fired from a company. I was removed from a role, put another manager role. Long story, whatever. But it destroyed me. It absolutely destroyed me, because everything I was to myself was defined by what I did at my job. If I didn't have that prestigious title, if I wasn't making that six-figure salary, I didn't think I was worth anything. And when that was taken, even though it wasn't quite that bad, it shook me. I never really failed at that company for working there for 8 years. And it really shook me. And I really look back on it now. Had I not started exploring that I'm not just my job, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a learner, I'm a person that also loves to have fun, I'm a passionate individual. And all of those are components that define me. They're just as important as my job. But I over-indexed, and I looked at my job as being this one thing for everything, right? And that's a problem. So because I was able to get there, life design is understanding all those components, defining them for you, because they're different from me, for Kevin, to you, and then understanding, what do you want that to look like in a year from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, whatever it may be. And a fun thing that I suggest, what is the quote that you want to remember for this aspect, right? So if you're like, okay, I want to be the best father I could be, and that's one of the things that you want to do, great. What do you want to say as a quote to yourself that both logically appeals to you because you set that goal, but also emotionally connects to those heartstrings that keep you going when things get tough?
One symptom of a life design issue is a time management problem. And the reason I say that is, and I was at a conference with a friend here on LinkedIn named Gary Fry. And one of the comments made at this conference by Gary, I believe it was, is that we don't need to focus on time management. We need to focus on priority management. And when we have a good life design, we have established our priorities. And then how we spend our time will align with that if we have a good life design that we're working from. And by the way, life design is much bigger and incorporates our work. It's not the other way around. Life design, we don't work the beginning of our life, and theoretically, we don't work at the end of our life. So, work is not what we design around. We design around who we are, what we are, why we are, and all of those things, and then figure out how work will fit best into that. When we do that, we begin to get our priorities in order, and our time will follow accordingly. So if we're always conflicted that we need to do better time management because we're doing more of what we shouldn't do rather than what we need to do, then we got a life design issue going on.
And time management, the 4-quadrant exercise that we work with people with, urgent and not important being, X and Y axis. That's the reality. There's so much time that people spend on not urgent and not important things, or seemingly urgent and not important things,
right,
that we just don't have time for the other stuff, the urgent and important and not, and the urgent and not urgent and important. And that's the reality behind it. You hit it right on the head. And the last one in life, the fourth principle, is legacy. Legacy is something that I don't think we start worrying about until a little bit later into our years, but some start sooner than others, right? I started worrying about my legacy in my 20s because my dad had put that into my head at an early age, and he had such a great legacy that he left behind that I was like, if I could reach half of that, that'd be great. But Your lack of feeling like you are leaving a proper legacy is what causes so much stress, whether it be looking at your kids, your family members, your friends, and how you're supporting them, whether it be looking at a simple existential belief that when you're gone from this earth, how will you be remembered? What are the footprints? I don't have it up on the screen, but we have a different icon for each one of these principles. And for legacy, it's the footprints. It's 2 little feet. How are you going to leave your footprints on this earth? Whether it be, philanthropically, where you're creating buildings that help people, whether it be individually, where you're investing in mentoring, a single human being that you changed their life. It's different for everybody. Somebody like me may want to change 10 million lives. Somebody that's different may want to focus on one and really make that life be as good as they can be. So no right or wrong, but legacy has to be part of your focus on a regular basis in order to manage your stress.
Symptom of a legacy problem, legacy stress, is if when crisis hits your life and all of the sudden you're flooded with all kind of regrets. That's an indicator you got a legacy problem, because it's in our legacy that we start facing our choices and realize we have regrets. And everybody looks at that as an end of life concept, but it's not. When we experience, for example, even I would say that part of the stress we're dealing with related to this pandemic is it has forced us to realize and reevaluate and consider our priorities in a lot of different areas. And as a result, a lot of people are beginning to face a lot of regrets and reevaluating. So if you're when crisis occurs in your life and you first thing you go to is regrets, you may have an issue in the area of legacy.
Absolutely. Quick shout out to Rachel Beck, our friend, and shout out to Jared
Rachel,
for joining. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. But yeah, so I mentioned the last time the internal health was the most hidden of the stressors in health. I believe that legacy is the most hidden of stressors in life, because it's something that eats at us subconsciously. It's not something that we're very aware of. It's not something that's talked about often. But some of the other things that we just discussed are not unknown. These are common conversations. But that legacy one is definitely one to pay attention to. The last one is work. And we used to call it leadership. And I feel like leadership kind of puts it into a very smaller focus point. Work as in general, because your systems and processes are also problems. They can also be issues. And leadership could be doing everything correctly outside of those things, and they can be problematic. So, but it starts with leadership. It's servant leadership is the first pillar we focus on, our first principle we focus on within the work pillar, because it starts and ends there. I'm telling you that if you want to have great culture, great employees, great anything, it just cannot be done without great leadership. I don't mean titled leadership, because great leadership can come from peers, it can come from subordinates, it can come from all over the place. But great leadership and servant type of leadership has to be present in order for that team to be at its best.
Yeah, and one of the things I remind people, servant leadership is not a leadership style, it is a lifestyle. Very different. I'm all about leadership styles and using them depending on where your group and team is at, but servant leadership has to be a lifestyle, because you have to be thoroughly grounded in 3 characteristics: responsibility. In fact, some people say extreme responsibility. Second one is acceptance, and that's both inward and outward. And then this is one that our culture has truly diminished a lot, and that's humility. It's not all about me. It never has been, never will be. And the more we can understand that, the better chance that we can be effective and, by the way, take care of ourselves. Humility is not abasement. It is not putting ourselves down. That's not humility. Humility is recognizing who we are and recognizing who others are and having respect for both of them at an equal level. And so,
well said, Ben.
Those 3 things are essential to being servant leader.
Absolutely. And then from there, like we said, but you can't have great teams without great leaders and servant leaders, but you also can't have great teams without great culture. Culture is something that is our second pillar within, work focus, because it once again supersedes the next two. And because culture is very misunderstood, culture is so broad and so big that I wish I'd actually, you know what, I'm going to get Russ on the show. He's on LinkedIn a lot. I don't know if you've seen him, Russ Hill. He's one of the best people I've ever seen speak to culture. I actually want to get him on here. That just reminds me. But anyway, so with culture, it's really misunderstood. People think culture is just what people say about your company. I'm like, that's a very small aspect about it. It's the feeling, it's the actions, it's the behaviors, it's the, I look at culture and it's a very different way maybe than most. Say, what do your people do when you're not there? Like when you are no longer there as a leader, and if you left for a month, what would happen if you were to do that? If the place falls apart, you don't have culture. That there's no good culture there. If the place runs seamlessly, then you have good culture. And that's my test.
Well, see, I prefer a term that we have started using over culture, and that's organizational ecosystem. I really like that better because it captures more the essence of culture. Mm-hmm. Culture has multifacets to it, and it is has to be approached in that fashion. Culture is not, well, let's do a smile campaign. That's a nice piece, but that's not culture. Mm-hmm. Culture goes much further than that, much deeper than that, if we're going to do it sustainably.
And culture takes years to build. That's one thing that people have to understand. You're not going to get a culture expert that's going to come in and be like, bam, here's the perfect culture for you. 6 months from there, you're there. No, it takes time. That's why turnover and retention is so key. You see how this stress thing keeps coming back in, because that's the biggest thing that causes issues with retention of team member and customer retention. It's just stress issues, right? Stress problems. And when you lose these people, you keep having breakdowns in culture, and you just don't know what's going to fill in that gap when that gap occurs. When that person leaves, what is being filled back in there? And chances are it's a quick hire. It's something that we don't have the pipeline for because we're losing people faster than we can find them. And now what we had a year ago is completely destroyed because we brought in so many new faces that just don't fit it, or they weren't built properly to go through the change process. The next one is performance management. Performance management is the next biggest thing with stress, and it's one probably the most understood. Traditional performance management is garbage, guys. If you're still using traditional performance management, please do the research and see that research actually shows traditional performance management causes performance decrease. It's a decrease in performance. You're better not doing performance management. Your people will do better than that traditional annual review where I'm giving you feedback in December for stuff that you did in January. Like, come on, man. I've changed. I've evolved. I've corrected that mistake a million times, but you're still bringing it up. Not their fault. It's because they haven't had a chance to do that. That's the system that the company utilizes. Throw that system away. Agile performance management is the only way you can manage performance, because feedback has to be timely and relevant. And if it's not any longer, you might as well just close your mouth, because you're just going to upset that person in the long run.
And if it's purely based on KPIs, you're missing the whole point of it. I think of the quote by Albert Einstein is that, and I'm gonna probably butcher it, but it's about if our measure of success is to climb a tree, okay, that's our KPI, and we ask a fish to climb a tree, the fish is going to spend all its life feeling stupid because it can't climb a tree. So understanding how we measure performance has to be based on the people on our team. Mm-hmm. And it also needs to be primarily around their strengths. Mm-hmm. Hi, Rafia. Thanks for joining, Rafia.
It's a lot easier to move somebody's potential in their strength than it is in their weakness. And as leaders, that's what we should always be striving, is identifying people's potential, getting them there, and seeing who do I have on this team that can, balance this person's weakness? How can I redistribute these tasks? And that's what a great leader does. Yep. And when you can get to that level, when you can get away from this rigidity of like everybody does things this way and custom tailor it to your team because you know your team.
Yeah.
You're unstoppable. I mean, you really are unstoppable. And the last pillar, guys, go ahead.
That's the value of having your roles divided into tasks rather than descriptions, because then you can pick the tasks that fit the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the last one, guys, is communication. And communication, this is where we really bring the inclusion and diversity umbrella in. It's the basics of communication. Yes, clarity, cadence, timeliness, all those things, but also inclusive and diverse communication, keeping open channels of communication, helping everybody be able to speak up, and having radical candor in the organization, that a person in a front line can feel comfortable giving feedback to a person at the very top of the organization. And when that happens, the person at the very top responds with gratitude, because that's some of the best feedback you can ever get. It's some of the feedback you never get, but some of the best feedback you could get if you have the proper communication channels set up.
I would love to see, especially anyone in leadership, take the effort to find some insight, even some wisdom in regards to communication and the impact of communication and their communication delivery based on themselves and understanding that. For me, I still continue to work on active listening. My mind goes 100 miles a minute, and so I have to. It is a challenge for me to active listen, and it's a skill that I have been continuing to develop, but I've gotten much better. And as a result, my communication has become more effective because I actually hear what people are trying to say.
Well, and you're also helping them be heard, right? And that's listening is something I've always struggled with myself. It's funny, like my password's been something to do with listening for years now. It's not working. But it's not just that you understood what's being said. That's biggest lessons been for me in listening is you can grasp that everything that person said, that's great. But if you didn't help them be heard, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So if you're like me, you're fairly, smart person, intellectual, whatever brain works well like you, off the first conversation, because I know my people so well, I already know where they're going with it, what they're going to say. And it doesn't matter if I'm accurate. If I interrupt them and I move on to something else, or I don't get them say their piece, that conversation was a detractor. That conversation was a withdrawal out of that piggy bank, that metaphorical piggy bank that we should have between a relationship with a leader and a subordinate. And I made a massive withdrawal without realizing it. And even if I'm trying to help them in the situation, everything said after that point is going to be washed away because of that action.
Yeah, that efficiency is a penny wise and pound foolish approach, because you may have gained a couple extra seconds, but you have probably torn down or not, depending on situation, you have negatively impacted that relationship and your culture if you're not careful.
Absolutely. So guys, those are our principles. Those are the 12 principles that we have within the 3 pillars of life, health, and work. And ultimately what we'd love to do is for you just to simply reach out to us, go to prospectiveforce.com, take the assessment. You can do this as a team. You can do this as yourself as an individual. There's a quick little assessment, that pre-assessment that goes through 12 questions to see, do you look at risk for this? Okay, if you are at risk for poor stress management, then take the full 60-question assessment that'll then identify which of these 12 principles you are doing the worst with, and then you focus on that to correct it. What we offer too is, if you want to do this as a team, for a limited time, we're offering lunch and learns, basically where your whole team will take the assessment prior to us coming, and then virtually or in person, depending on where you want to do this, we will go through it and break down what it means, why it is what it is, to really create that buy-in from people of, I actually need to change this, because we see the big picture of what it connects to everything.
By the way, Anton Raffia, I don't know if you saw the comment, says thanks for including her on the post.
Oh, for your B-Day?
Well, I wasn't going to include that part, but yes.
People love you, man. People love you, and it was an easy one because I know you have such a great community. I just grabbed the people that I know you normally speak with. I know they were glad to wish you a happy birthday. I mean, you do so much for LinkedIn in general. All of us on here. I mean, it's well deserved. But guys, that's it. So if you need our help, we're here to help. Don't wait until this problem becomes so bad it's going to take a year and a half to fix. Let's fix it in 3 months and move forward and unleash your team's potential.
And if you want a lot of good knowledge, we now have 61 hours of information, and it's all available. I'll even share a link where we have it curated for anyone that wants to grab it and look. So the knowledge is free, but we're ready to help you do something with it. Just ask us.
Yeah, that's our belief. We believe knowledge should be free. If we can help you just by giving away the knowledge, we'll do it for free. That's fine. I'll give you everything you need. Promise you, everything you need to change your life and your team's life. Unfortunately, knowledge is the least of the things that most people need. It's accountability, custom tailored approach, and really getting all people behind this objective. All right, guys, that's all the time we got.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week, and we will see you again this same time next week and carry forward with our conversations. Thanks. Take care. God bless.
Bye, guys.